Hi, my name's Bianca. I guess the first thing that I would like to start with is why we find these kind of talks inspirational. And I think one of the main reasons why people come to these kind of talks is because they want to be honest. In my bio, I put that that I'd left my partner, but in the reality is he left me. We had been together for 3.5 years. I was getting married, much to my parents' dismay, at 19. And I had been broken. The whole thing had broke me entirely. I didn't know who I was, where I was coming from, what was going on. I spent weeks in bed, not leaving, not doing anything. And the thing I think about exposure therapy that's really important is the main part of it is being honest with yourself about who you are and what scares you. Because it is a scary question to ask yourself, what actually frightens you? What are the things that you want to do that you don't do? That you wake up every morning thinking, you know what, I really wish I'd started that last year. And you still haven't started it 3 years later. And you're wondering where the time's gone, what you're doing with your life, what keeps you up at night. And the biggest thing about exposure therapy is retraining your brain to react differently to certain stimuli, because the prominent thing with using it is anxiety, which I suffer from greatly even now, but has gotten a lot better in different situations. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit of science. So in your brain, there's something called the amygdala. It's known as the fear center of your brain. It controls your fight, flight, or freeze responses. So it controls how you react in different situations with different people or different stimuli. It is 5 times faster than your thought process. So when you stand there and you're scared, like you get a fear in your stomach, your hands are shaking or you're sweating, it's because your brain has recognized you're in a situation that's creating fear, so it responds before you know what it's responding to. It's vital in protecting you. That's its main aim. Its main job is to protect you from things you're afraid of, but it becomes very different from when you're a caveman running away from a lion to when you're in a shopping mall scared of a shopping cart. Like, it doesn't register what is silly, what might seem weird, what might be unusual to people in general. It doesn't see that. All it sees is, this is a problem, you need to get away from it. So its main aim is to keep you alive. So even if you have multiple anxiety attacks, your body is perceiving something that might be a threat, whether it's imminent or in the future. It doesn't want to make any false negatives because its survival instinct kicks in so hard that it knows that if it makes the wrong decision, that could be the end of your life. But running away from shopping carts will not be the end of your life. It's just different depending on what you react to and what you've been afraid of. It's also to do with what you've been through. Your body goes for a certain element of conditioning, where over time, because you've been around something or something has scared you, it's conditioned to make you feel that way. So the more that you expose yourself to something, it reconditions the way your brain behaves and how it works. It learns by association rather than you talking it down, which is why when you get into these states where you feel overwhelmed, it's really difficult to talk yourself out of it because your body is behaving separately in 2 different headspaces. So exposure therapy as a whole is a technique that is primarily used to treat mental health disorders, so anxiety, PTSD, anything which generally causes an extreme amount of emotion in your body. It's the idea of retraining your brain to be able to recognize when there is actual danger versus when there is something that necessarily is just a bit of an issue or bothers you slightly. It's the way that I did this myself is I went to, at work, they did this course called The Rising Stars as an effort to ignore the fact they weren't promoting people, but going, yeah, we're going to help you. So I did this course and I sat down in there and they said, the first part of it was personal branding. They said, who are you? And I was like, I can't answer that question. I don't know who I am. I don't know how to express how I feel about anything, and realized that I needed to kind of sit down and go, who do I want to be? I don't need to be this person who I was a month, a year, 10 years ago, although I don't be 13-year-old me ever again. But I needed to think about what it was I wanted for my future, that not to let my past limit me in such a way that it affected the rest of my life. Because I was like, I don't want to live like this for another 30 years. I don't want to be holed up in bed, not going outside, not speaking to anybody. So I started going out for breakfast. On a Saturday morning, I would get up and I would go sit in a different cafe every time, and I'd go out for breakfast because I love food. food is great. But I tried to move it around to different places, so I was exposed to different people and different elements, different situations and environments, because I realised I would just get stuck in a routine of going work, home, sleep, eat, work, home, sleep, eat, and that's all I would do. So I tried to mix it up a little bit, but it was only on a Saturday morning because that was enough exposure therapy for me for 1 week. And eventually, over time, this ended up being multiple times a week. I ended up going on my first solo trip, not last year, the year before, to Barcelona. Since then, I went to Canada on my own, which is really good fun. Canadian people are amazing. And I ended up traveling to so many different places, meeting so many different people. The situations weren't always great. There were situations that tested me. For example, I was in Norway, and I was couchsurfing with a guy I'd never met before who locked me out of his house in -5-degree weather at 1 a.m. I was like, cool, I've got my passport, I've got my phone, I've got everything important. If I need to leave, I can do that. I can leave everything behind. But knowing that I was somewhere I'd never been before, with people I'd never met before, in an environment I had no idea what I was doing, was terrifying. It's always scary. Everything we do as people can be terrifying for different people in different ways. And it's really important, I think, in recognizing how things scare you and how things are important to you and other things that aren't important to you. It taught me how to be more resilient as a person, how many things I had actually overcome. Because it's very difficult once you go, as I know most people will probably feel, you go a certain amount of time over a journey and you kind of forget what it was like at the start. You get to the end, or semi-end or middle, and you're like, I'm still not doing good enough. This still isn't good enough. This still isn't okay. But you know you're not where you necessarily want to be, but you've come so far from where you started. And that's really important, to realize where you actually started from, which I'm still terrible at doing, by the way. But this is... the one thing about exposure therapy as well is recognizing that the experiences we go through in terms of feeling anxious aren't necessarily all harmful to us. So it's, there is rational fear. There are things to be afraid of from the things you've been in life, but there are very much irrational fears. And it's still okay to feel scared of something, but it's about knowing how much being scared of that something is affecting your life detrimentally. How much is it making an impact on everything that you're doing? So 100 Days of Rejection I wanted to talk about, which is an amazing TED Talk. I love TED Talks. All about a guy who decided for 100 days he would be rejected in 100 different ways. And he hated being rejected. He was like, this is bullshit. So he spent the first few days being rejected in all these weird scenarios and situations, and was having palpitations. He was freaking out. He hated it entirely. And then by the end of it, he was like, this is great. Every time I get rejected, it gives me something else to look forward to. And one of my friends taught me that. She was like, every time you get rejected from something, it's the way of life redirecting you in a different direction. And I think it is a really, really good TED Talk to explain what exposure therapy actually is, and the idea of retraining yourself to respond differently to the things that have scared you. Yes Theory is also another really, really good social network on Facebook. They're on Instagram, but there are loads of people around the world who live by this example, who do all the things that scare them. For example, Yes Theory went to Luxembourg, decided to hike from one side of the country to the other without a map or knowing anywhere they were going, just by talking to random people in the street. And I'm not recommending that you necessarily do that, taking it in baby steps, but I think it's really good for connecting with people and finding out what other people are doing and being inspired by them, because there's so many things that all these people do, even tiny things. So I guess my conclusion to this is, if you want to try and do something that you've always wanted to do, find the smallest ways to do it. It doesn't have to be something drastic. You don't have to cut all your hair off and run to India. You genuinely just have to find the smallest things that scare you and just take that little step time by time and figure out what works for you. You can do it with friends or alone. My last little bit I wanted to put down is that the best thing about exposure therapy is there is no right or wrong way to do it. Just do what you feel or not feel comfortable with. Thank you.